03 Honda S200 AP1. It's the last year of the AP1. It ran from 99 to 03. Considered by most to be the best S2000. It's the F20C motor, so it's the 2.0 4-cylinder, 9,000 redline. It's the most sought after one, I believe, in my opinion at least.
So besides the motor, what's different about the AP1?
It was suspension-wise, much stiffer suspension. It's a very, very stiff, snappy car. On stock wheels, they came with 16s, 16 by 6.5 in the front and 7.5 in the rear. And they ran a 205, 225 tire for a stagger. They were very hard to handle. Pre-traction control, there's no electronic assist, there's very little. ABS is about all you got, granny-wise. In 04, they did the facelift. They gave them a little more aggressive front bumper, rear bumper, softened the suspension, which is rare. You don't usually see cars going softer, but the AP1 was notorious for being a white-knuckle, hard-to-drive car. So it requires your attention.
How long have you had this?
I've had this since the very beginning of last May, so 13 months now, I guess.
So you're getting to know it a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I did a lot of research before I made the jump on it because, as most people know, they're appreciating at this point, and it's hard to find one at a decent price anymore. You know, anything under 15 grand at this point is generally has seen quite a bit. It's very hard to find stock body, original matching VINs, original paint, without being rolled fenders or pulled or any of that to fit wider wheels and stuff, or something that hasn't been modded too heavily. Just like most, the unmodified versions usually command the higher prices. My intentions are to keep this completely stock body. I do not want to roll any fenders, do any of that. Not that I have any intentions of ever selling this thing, but just not in the cards for me.
That was going to be the question at the end of the video, but you kind of beat me to it, because I always ask, would you ever sell it?
People say, or at least I'd seen in my research before I bought it, that it's going to ruin other cars for you. And I believe that 1,000,000%, because I have a 3 Series Beamer that I loved, and now it feels like I'm driving a sponge. It's basically like a Prius to me anymore. I've turned it down, I've ripped all the mods off, and it's basically back to bone stock, because what's the point when you have a 6-speed manual turbo rear-wheel drive roadster that, like, the epitome of fun.
What was the determining factor that pushed you toward the S2000? Why this car? What else did you look at? And what really got me into cars pretty heavy was I bought a 3 Series because I always liked BMW. Started like modding it a little bit here and there. It was fun, and then it got old, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do something new. I was doing well for myself too, so I was like, oh, well, let me look for an E30 Vert or an E30, maybe find an old M3 that's not super expensive. So I actually found a 91 E30 red convertible, 325. I started getting a little more into the idea, and I thought, you know what, this is going to take a few years to get this thing even driving. All the money that I would have to put into it to get it to that point, kind of like, will I ever even finish the project? And for 2-3 months, my buddy was hounding me, yo, buy my S2000. Okay, let's go for a drive, let's try it out. I actually didn't even know how to drive manual when I bought this car. No.
Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm paying the money. I'm going to force myself to learn.
That's awesome.
It was easily like one of the best decisions I've ever made, because I know I would not have finished that E30 project. And to buy something that is ready to go, already super fun. I mean, if I was going to do the E30 project, I probably would have put in more money than what I have into this anyway. And it still would be slower and not as fun.
So what have you done with it so far? What have you done to it?
I have gone to an AP2 spec wheel. Now that's 17 by 7 in the front. 17 by 8.5 in the rear, a 215 up front, and a 245 in the rear. So I've gone up 1 size in the front, 2 sizes in the rear tire width. I've also gone from like a 340 treadwear tire to the 200 treadwear, and they are not only wider but way grippier. It has transformed this car. A rear spoiler, just like an OE style, just to get a little bit, because that trunk line is a little lacking on the stock body, so it just gives it just a little bit there. Running 15 PSI right now on 93 octane. It's making just about 365 wheel.
Do you know what it weighs?
With me in the driver's seat, I would say it's probably in the just over 2,800 pound range.
That's a real good set of numbers.
It's a good power to weight ratio. These cars were just like absolutely phenomenal from the get-go. In '99, when they made this, it was the highest horsepower per liter vehicle on the planet. It's actually a Ferrari 458 knocked it off in 2010. So it took another 10 years and a supercar to knock off what Honda did as basically a tribute to themselves for their 50th anniversary. It's pretty low miles too for an 03, like 58,000 right now. It's well maintained, well kept, and I like to keep it that way. It's almost too clean to mess with, so I don't want to do anything outrageous to it.
Going back real quick to suspension.
This one is actually on Spec R springs, so it is like a 1 1/4, 1.5 inch drop, which doesn't get me into too much trouble. The front lip doesn't scrape a whole lot. I just got to be really careful. Yeah, I guess it's been turbo now 3 or 4 years. The motors are actually very, very, very well built. Stock motor, stock internals, everything can handle pretty much up over 500 wheel. I think the supercharged route is generally more common because it's a more reliable power delivery than a turbo, but I've seen bigger numbers on turbo cars.
How many pounds of boost you're on?
15. It's turned up. You see a lot in the lower range in the 8 pounds. That's what it was tuned on originally. 8 pounds seems to be a pretty common one, up 12, 15. When you get above into the 20-ish range, you start actually having to do a little bit of stuff to keep them together or have any kind of reliability. You kind of lose the whole Honda reliability when you start doing all that. This is the Honda. This is the one. It commands the most attention. You pull into a meet or something and people have their phones out and they're watching. When you're shooting flames out of the rear and stuff and people say, man, I've never seen one of these in person, or this is my dream car. I finally understand that now. You really have to drive one, but you need to have a need for speed and you got to have no fear, I guess.
2005 Nissan 350Z. Whenever I purchased the car, it had a blown up motor, no front end. At one point, the previous person that owned it thought was going to spray paint it. The next guy that owned
like rattle can?
Yeah,
really?
Full blown like Krylon rattle can the job. The person I bought it from started sanding it down to prep it. Well, he had no garage, so he would sand it down, and then it sat and started rusting. It looked like an old farm truck.
So you really had just a shell to start with, pretty much, right?
Yeah, pretty much. There was no front end at all, no ride support, so nothing.
Where did you start from that point?
The day I picked it up, pulled the motor, painted the engine bay. The car came with a new motor, got some mid-length headers, put it on that, and then within 24 hours, I was driving the car again.
No kidding.
Yep, from pickup to the first drive was 24 hours.
There's probably a story behind the wrap. Tell us a little bit about that.
So when I got the car, I wasn't super worried about it looking pretty. It had the whole patina look to it.
That's a nice way of saying rust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a classy rust.
Classy rust.
My buddy texted me one day, he wraps cars too. He's like, do you have any customers that would want a Galaxy wrap? Kind of a hard sell. I was like, you know what? Like, we can work out a good deal for it. I was like, I'll come pick it up. We worked out a good deal and I picked it up. I sat in the garage. I was looking at the car, looking at the wrap. I was like, let's just throw it on there. Like, it was something better than what it was. So the wrap kind of just like happened. It's a lot more attention than you would think.
Everybody that I've talked to about your car refers to it as the Galaxy Z.
Yep.
You can never take it off now.
We keep it on for next season because I change up my wraps every year.
Oh, do you?
Yep, every year something different. I did that with my old Z. I'm gonna keep doing it with this one.
Have any ideas in mind?
I have tons. I want to do it as a U-Haul with the big 1995 a day with the orange like squiggle down the side. I want to bring back a wrap I had on my old Z that like everyone loved. It was a P40 Warhawk.
Oh,
like
nice.
The old bomber with the shark
Yeah.
mouth going down the side. A lot of people want me to bring back that one too, that knew me from that car. I really want to do it fuchsia with my logo and livery down the whole side of it. The chassis was like my main thing because when I put the motor in it, I knew the DEs on these cars are not the best. They like to burn quite a bit of oil. It's kind of like the nature of the beast with them. The motor has a Kintex plenum, Nismo short ram intake, headers, full exhaust. So it's like very basic. I didn't want to get too into it and go crazy for a motor that I know I'm probably going to send a rod through the block and put a cooler, better motor in it to make some more power. Car's on Godspeed coilovers right now, just a cheaper coilover setup. The front is where most of the money went. It has GK Tech lower control arms. So the 350s have a 2-piece lower control arm. So what the GK Tech ones do is it converts it to 1 piece. And there's a big cutout, so you have more steering lock, and they're all adjustable, all Heim joints. They're made from chromoly, so they're strong. You can go anywhere from a 1/4 inch to 2 inches over stock kicked out on the bottom, which is really good for handling and the angle. And then on that, I have GK Tech's Super Angle kit, and that's just very easy kit to go with. It just literally bolts onto your knuckle. There's no like chopping or welding like old 240s.
Yeah.
Because in the back it's a shock and a spring design, and with these it just converts it to 1. You get rid of the whole lower arm, replace that with a bar, and then camber toe arms and all that.
How much below stock height are you? Like 2 inches lowered about?
Probably gets like 2.5.
Yeah.
It used to be much lower, but I was having issues when it would be at full lock. The fender would bite down into the tire with the white transfer. But over winter, I'm probably gonna go real low again. Hopefully get new wheels over winter time and just completely dump it. A lot of people that know me from my old Z knew how low it was, and I will frame bang everywhere I go. There's no mechanical sympathy when I drive my vehicles. If I made that low, I'm not gonna baby it and be like, oh well, I shouldn't have made it. I'm gonna rail everything.
Did you say no mechanical sympathy?
Yes.
That's perfect. Yeah. Tell me about the wheels.
They're an Avid one, so they're a replica of a T37, which is my favorite wheel. I'm not like a huge wheel guy, but T37s, you got real big from your childhood and seeing them on everything back in the day. But I actually got the wheels for free. Most of the car is like that. I really have like no money into the car at all.
Really?
I think I estimate now I have like $1,000 into the car.
Come on.
Of my own money. So I wrap cars on the side.
Right.
So everything I do is with guys with these cars or similar hobbies or whatever, and we'll just work out trade deals.
Barter, yeah.
The wheels, seats, the harnesses, the nitrous that's going on the car here in a few days, steering wheel, like everything is just like all bargained and always hustled for.
So how did you actually get the car to begin with then? Is that like the only thing you had to lay out money for?
Yeah, pretty much. The car was actually local. It was one of my buddies who
Yeah.
I knew through having Z's. He had a 240Z and he had this, and the motor blew up, and that's when he was like, yeah, not the right time to have this car or whatever, you know, getting older, getting houses and all that. And I always told him, like, hey, you ever want to sell that car? I was like, you call me first. I told him that since the day he bought it. And then one day I was at work, phone goes off, you want to buy the Z? I was like, I'll be there tomorrow morning. I said, broad low maxes. For someone being as tall as I am, I don't really fit super awesome in 240. It's kind of awkward for me, and since the Z is a bigger car, I fit better. The low max put me real low. Onto those, I have Buddy Club ultra low seat rails. You have a helmet on when you're on track, there's probably an inch above my head, factory location, but with these there's like 4 inches, so there's enough room for helmet and actually move your head.
What'd you do exhaust-wise?
It's all real cheap stuff. The headers are just mid-length, who knows what brand. I picked up for some guy, he had them, paid like $50 for them, kind of wheeled and dealed with him a while. It's literally from there on back, it's just all eBay. It is a full stainless steel exhaust, 2 resonators on your mid-pipes, what should probably be a resonator, but there's not anything inside them anymore. And then the mufflers, and I don't know how much backing in those either. The last time I put the car up in there, I did crack it in like 8 places. Which just welded it right back up, and we're good to go. It's been good now.
That the hood looks a little different because of the latches.
It's all aero catches, the whole hood. There's no more hinges, there's no bracket.
So basically the hood comes off.
Yeah, it's a lift-off hood. The reason for that is if you're hot lapping it and there's not a ton of cars on grid, try to get it as cool as possible.
Yeah.
And the worst thing with drifting is you go there, and the last thing you want to do after driving for 4 hours is to work on something and even put in 4 bolts. I did it with my old car, and my other buddies do it. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. My hood is going to be slammed on, I'm going to lash these, and it's calling a day.
I usually ask somewhere in the video if it's something you'd ever get rid of. What do you think?
Over the course of time, the chassis is going to get beat enough that will probably end up being non-usable anymore.
It's not that you dislike anything about this car. It's just you bought this one for a purpose.
Yeah, I bought
the
this one.
Purpose of destroying.
I bought this car just to thrash. Like the body is all very straight on it. And me and my buddies always, talk about hitting each other and all that stuff, and like hitting walls and stuff. And some people aren't cool with that. Some people don't want to mess up their drift cars. I bought and built the car just to thrash it and beat it. The big thing with the car too is whenever I got it, I had a lot of friends that got into drifting whenever they started talking to me and hanging out with me a lot more. They're like new to the car industry, new to the car world. So that's kind of intimidating for younger people. As many people as I could, I would let work on this thing. So if I was doing something like the one person, he's never seen a motor get pulled, he's never seen any of that, and he has to help. But it's more of the learning thing of saying like, okay, you have a basic idea. It was like 2 weeks ago, he pulled his motor out. He's ready to put a new motor in his car. When I got the car a year ago, he's never seen that before in his life. So it's nice helping other people, get them more into it, get a little bit hands-on. Whenever I was young, because I grew up on a farm in the middle of the country. I didn't know there was even like a car scene local to this area. I thought I was just a weird dude with a Japanese car just living on a farm in the middle of nowhere land. I was like, man, it'd be cool to cruise with some people or like talk to someone about imports and that stuff. And then I found out Pittsburgh has a pretty decent car community. I started coming out more, started meeting a bunch of people. Like the hardest thing is just going into something and you don't know anyone. It can also be intimidating because you see someone with like a built car or whatever and you don't know much. You don't want to think like you're an idiot. You just gotta find someone that's like cool, wants to teach you about it or just talk to you about it, introduce you to the world. We all started somewhere. We all didn't start by jamming big motors with turbos in cars. Like we all started by pulling a cone filter on your Civic in high school. I thought you were the coolest person in the world. Start small and work your way up.
This is a 04 Subaru WRX. It's not the STI model, that's the upgraded model, and this generation goes by Blobeye usually.
What's that mean?
The difference pretty much is the front clip of the car. So the headlights, they look more like a blob compared to the generation before it, which were more circular, and that was called a bug eye. And then the generation after it is kind of sharper pointed headlights, and it's called a Hawkeye. Yeah.
How long have you had it?
I've had it for maybe 8 months, and I've been driving it for half of it.
Is that because you've been working on it?
Yeah. So I drove it for the first 2 or so months with what's called a hybrid motor in it. I didn't know a lot about Subarus when I first bought it, but it has the STI and WRX block and head combination. That just ended up blowing up on me, so I had to swap in. It's just a EJ 205, so I went back to the normal WRX motor. This is the car's third motor, so I had no real experience before this car for engine pulls and stuff, so I learned the hard way. I got it done, I guess.
Not a brand new engine you dropped in it.
No, I got it from a guy down, actually here. I'm not from around here, I'm from 2 hours north, but I came down here and bought it from a guy, traded in my old motor for scraps, got a pretty good deal on it. It was like $500 after the trade-in.
Oh wow, that's really good.
And it only has like 40,000 miles on it. The car was pretty much stock except for the hybrid motor and a few smaller things. I got it with blown struts, pretty awful. It had the stock WRX wing. That's probably one of the biggest things people see first. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I did the suspension work, I did most of the motor work. What I did when I swapped the motor was I actually took all the good stuff off my hybrid build, kind of swapped it over. So I'm running a VF34 turbo, Walbro 255 fuel pump, I got the STI injectors, a few other goodies, and I'm making decent power. I'm making 300, over 300. I only got it street tuned because four-wheel dyno is just expensive and hard to find.
Tell me what you did with the suspension.
I'm actually running the cheap, like the best of the cheap you can run. They're Racelands, the Ultimos or something like that, so they have like full adjustment and everything.
I'm thinking that you may have just titled your video,
what?
The best of the cheap.
Yeah, it is.
It's pretty good.
Well, that is kind of the whole preface of this build is I don't have a lot of money because I'm pretty young. I'm going through school, so I'm on a college budget. Most of the parts I got on here are Facebook Marketplace. I love Facebook Marketplace. The wing is a Big Country Labs wing. Those are a pretty penny, but I got it for a good price. Pretty good condition as well. And I just tried to make sure I did everything right on it when I did do things. I didn't really shortcut with this car like I used to with my old cars. The exhaust, it's a 3-inch Borla all the way through. I mean, it spits flames at night. It's pretty fun, especially on mountain runs. You can see it spitting flames, which is awesome.
About the wheels?
They're another Facebook Marketplace. They're Enkis. I can't remember the model. The tires I'm running, it's a square setup. It's Falcon Azenas 245s all around, 245 40s on 17 by 9s.
How many miles are on the chassis?
I just rolled it over 200,000. The great thing about this car, the reason why I did buy this car was because the chassis has no rust. Subaru is known for rust. I looked under and there's literally no rust. It's funny, since I did the engine swap, the engine must have came from up north because it has more rust than the chassis does. Front splitter, I added Amazon, 50 bucks. This car is super low, especially for me, and I did not want to spend like 100 bucks on something I'm going to be ripping off. I already have ripped that splitter and my bumper off 4 times already. It sucks.
Speed bumps.
A lot of people actually swap these scoops. So this was another huge thing, a huge principle that I had building this was it's a WRX, it's not an STI. So yes, this is a WRX scoop. It's a little shorter than the STI one. And the STI one, it's way in your way when you're driving. It's the subtle differences which I like. I've been trying to keep it clean and sleek and not an STI, that's for sure. Future plans for power, when I get a second car and I'm making a lot more money and willing to blow this one up, all I need on this right now is a electronic boost controller and a tune. I'd be making a lot more power. And then for handling, bigger brakes definitely. The STI transmission, that's the one thing I would definitely do. On the WRXs, it's a split case. Launching this on pavement is a no-go because you'll split it. People always think when you launch these things that it's going to be the axles that break first, but it's actually the transmission and the WRXs. And the STI transmission also has a 6 gear, which is nice.
Is this a car you keep for good?
I love taking it on gravel roads, even when it's low. I do a lot of donuts and gravel lots and whatnot. I do miss rear-wheel drive. I might rear-wheel drive swap this in the future, but I couldn't see myself getting rid of it.
It is a 1988 Mazda RX-7. It's a GTU package. I'm not real sure what that actually meant back in the day, but it just got some cool goodies. I've had this car for a year and maybe 6 months or so. I've had RX-7s for a while. I bought it because I wanted to try out the next generation chassis because I had 2 first generation chassis and the FC seemed like the next logical step. A little bit more modern, fuel injected over carbureted, and it seemed like a good buy.
So for those of us who are not familiar with like the series, how many were there?
Your first generation RX-7 started off as the SA22C, and that was from like 79 to like 81-ish.
Okay.
And then from 81 to 85, they were the FB RX-7, and it's easy because the VIN code goes JM1FB. And then from 86 to 91 is the FC chassis, the second generation. The VIN code goes JM1FC. And then in the United States, from 1992 to 1996, they had your typical left-hand drive RX-7s, but in Japan, they had from 1996 to 2002. Those are the FD chassis, the third one, they go JM1FD. And 2003 or 2004 is when the RX-8 came out and
Ruined everything.
basically. I was gonna turn it into like a grip car, but I realized real quick how expensive the track days are, and I'm like, I can't afford that. So I decided, well, I turned it into my drift car because I always wanted to get into that sport. I thought it was a very interesting sport. So now is slowly turning into a drift car.
And when you got it, it was not.
No,
like
it was
So-
more or less stock. It had an aftermarket radiator, an aftermarket catback exhaust, stock motor. Nobody has touched the wiring in that car, which is a godsend because 80s cars and wiring just are not. They don't go together. Basically, just a run-of-the-mill car that was lowered, and then I picked it up. I put wheels on it first, just because when I got the car, I just had a little bit extra money set aside, and then I did an emissions delete. All the 30-odd feet of vacuum hose underneath the intake, I got rid of all of that. 30-year-old car, it's a prone for vacuum leaks. All the hoses are old, and it really spiraled out of control after that.
Don't they all?
Yeah, they all do.
That's the typical project timeline. Plan. Uh-oh.
And it just goes right off the deep end. This is like a turbo clone, basically. Okay. This car has the turbo hood, like from the Turbo 2 model, Turbo 2 mirrors, and a Turbo 2 wing. Those are just like an aero package deal. The hood is actually, it has a functioning top mount if it was a top mount intercooler, if it was a turbo model, but this is a naturally aspirated model, so like it's honestly just on there for show.
Where did it begin to spiral out of control?
I bought a couple parts cars and I put a set of coilovers on it. They were really cheap coilovers, but it made the car better than what it was. And I drove the car all last summer without much problem, other than it used a lot of oil because it was old. And then towards the end of the year, I noticed it was starting to burn coolant, a lot of coolant. I parked it one day for 2 weeks, and when I fired it up, I smoked out the whole garage with coolant. So I'm like, well, there it is. So I hit my web of RX-7 people, and I'm like, I need an engine. And I found an engine for pretty cheap, and I threw the engine in. While I had the engine out, I put new gaskets on everything. I bought a header for it, fabricated a little bit of an exhaust. Emissions deleted that engine, did a bunch of work.
Because you were good at it by the
Yeah,
way. Right.
Yeah. Well, none of the stuff was there, so I kind of didn't need it. Was kind of waiting on parts, waiting to save up some money for parts, and I ended up throwing it all back together, and I drove it maybe a month, 2 months, and then I tore it all back apart. I tore the entire rear subframe out of the car to redo all of the bushings because it's a 30-year-old car. I traded a guy, same guy I got the engine off of, the factory limited slip differential out of that car for an open diff. I welded it because it's a drift car and put Part Shop Max everything in the back. Solid subframe mounts, and they're also a subframe riser. Solid differential mounts, they're also a diff riser to correct the axle angle when you lower them. Heim joints for the control arms, the rear steer eliminator kit, adjustable camber links, adjustable tow bars. The whole rear of the car is solid and adjustable, so I do not have to ever touch it again. And I ripped all the front suspension apart and did polyurethane, I think energy polyurethane bushings for the control arms, sway bars front and rear, sway bar links. When I had the engine out, I put a CD Stage 2 puck clutch, sprung hub, 3 puck, very aggressive clutch. It does exactly what I want it to do. And then here about a week ago, I blew up the transmission and I had to replace it. I was having some fun with it, and first gear started making some noises. I was pretty sure I chipped the gear, and one too many clutch dumps in it, no teeth left on the gear. It would still go into first, but it just wouldn't do anything. So the RX-7, this has got a Wankel engine in it. They burn oil by design. What Mazda did was, in the front cover of the engine, there's a pressure tube that comes in to a little pump. It pressurizes the oil system and it runs it up to 4 oil injectors throughout the engine. There's 2 in the intake and 2 right on the rotor housings. They're actuated by vacuum because this is an old car and everything was actuated by vacuum. With this car, it had a linkage system for the pump. The more throttle you gave it, the more it would ramp the pump up, and it just squirts a little bit of engine oil into the intake, into the rotor housings, just to keep everything lubricated. Because your apex seals, the infamous apex seals, they make...
Dun. We have to put some dramatic music right here, because everybody's been waiting to hear
that. So the infamous apex seals, they make 100% constant contact with the rotor housing all of the time. When this motor's at 8,000 RPM, the rotors are at a little bit less than 3,000 RPM. They spin about 1/3 less than the crankshaft. Apex seals are scraping along the housing the whole time. You got to give them a lot of credit for what they are. I delete that system because they're prone for failure, and I actually put 2-stroke oil in the gas. So it is more or less a gigantic motorcycle.
It's a motocross bike.
It's a motocross bike stuffed in a little car. Engine oil is not designed to be burned. What it'll do is it'll carbon up the seals real bad, and then they'll get stuck. And then you'll lose compression, and you'll have weird starting issues, and then the engine won't run properly. So when you run 2-stroke oil is designed to be burned. So it burns cleaner, it burns better, the engine is healthier. I've never noticed the difference because I've never had one of these things with a working oil metering pump that has been on the car. That's the first thing I do with them is I take them off. So if it does fail, I won't blow the engine up. The block off kits are like $25. It's worth every penny. That's my personal opinion. You get on forums, and this debate has been going on since these cars came out as to whether or not to keep it or to not keep it. I personally like to delete it so that it is peace of mind. I am controlling it instead of the car. This car's probably got 40 dents in it, at least. Like, I've never counted them, but I could guess it is 40 dents. The paint's all chipped up, the hood's bent.
And it's perfect.
But it's perfect. It's perfect right, because if I do ding it or, kind of hit something and I scratch it, which I actually did a few weeks ago, I put a giant scuff across the front bumper. I was mad for 3 seconds, and then I'm like, well, I deserve that because it was my fault. Currently, it's on some D2 racing coilovers. They're pretty low. I'd like to go lower, but I am rubbing everywhere.
How many of these have you had?
This is number 3, but in total I've had 5. 3 of the FC chassis and 2 of the FB chassis. No FDs yet.
Have you run across one one that's like a keeper? Like, I'll never get rid of this one.
This one, exactly.
Really?
This one has turned into that. I've done so much work in a short amount of time. I don't want to get rid of it. I've got a really good bond with this car. I already like the rotary RX-7 platform, but this has kind of cemented that I'll be a rotary guy forever. This car will be 32 years old and sometime in September. I don't know when it was manufactured. It has the paint code called Sunrise Red. It's got purple and orange hues in it. So like in low light conditions, a lot more of the purple comes out. But when there's direct sunlight on it, it looks really orange. But in like medium light, it's red. It's really cool for a single stage paint that it is sort of got a pearlescence to it. But it's just there's a lot of other colors in there to make the red.
Do you see many others?
No, these things are getting really, really rare on the road. In our area, I know of probably 3 or 4 other FCs, maybe 3 or 4 FDs. They're starting to get quite rare to find roadworthy. They're not very common. They weren't common when they were new. These cars are a very high maintenance car. You must check the oil all of the time. You have to make sure the car is running properly. They go through spark plugs very fast. They're horrible on gas, but the driving experience is unlike anything else I've ever driven. I've driven quite a lot of cars, some high horsepower cars, some lower horsepower cars. Nothing compares to the way this car drives. Like, you can 100% tell that the car was designed around the engine and where the engine is placed. Technically a midship, the engine's mounted very low, very far back. The car's balanced quite well. I may have screwed that up when I put the welded diff in it, but it still drives like it's on rails all the time. The driving experience is unlike anything else.
1993 Mazda RX-7 FD3S.
How long have you had it?
I bought it in 2007.
Did it look like this when you bought it?
Actually, it did. Outside of the carbon fiber hood and the carbon fiber headlight covers, I had to replace those because I lost them on the racetrack at 130 miles an hour. Back when I bought it, I was a lot younger and didn't have a lot of money coming in, but I had a vision and we just slowly started getting there.
Where'd you start?
First thing I did to it was I put the front mount intercooler in, the Greddy custom intake on it, and then just the little tweaks here and there, chipped computer. Any of that other than the cold air intake is gone. That computer's gone. The front mount's still on there, but the intercooler piping's all different now. I think I'm at the point now where all of the parts that I've taken off, I can actually put together and have another ready-to-go motor.
So why this car?
Why not this car? It kind of
It's
fits.
the most misunderstood car in car culture, I think.
I think so, and it fits my personality perfect. I like something that's different, and I want something that people don't understand but still appreciate. And this is a car that back in 1993 all the way to today still gets the same amount of attention. It's timeless, it's classic, and the engine is just, if you can figure them out, it's an experience like nothing you've ever experienced before.
So you were looking for one?
No, actually I wasn't.
Oh.
On my birthday of all things, my wife and we went to the Pittsburgh Mills Mall because I needed a pair of jeans, so she was going to buy me a pair of jeans for my birthday, and it was just sitting in the food court in front of the store that we were going to, and I looked at it and always wanted one. It was my childhood hero. Before this one, I've had 3 second gens, imported a triple rotor, put a triple rotor in a second gen, sold that one to buy this car. You know, there we are on my birthday, and it was sitting in the food court. Everything I wanted. Red with black interior, racing beat exhaust, and I knew I wasn't walking out of there without it.
So we started with the intercooler. Walk me through where it's been.
The stuff that I did to it was before I hit my mechanical prime. You know, that was back in my misspent youth a little bit too, and I was racing a C6 Corvette, and I blew one of the rotors, one of the apex seals out of the rotor. And it was awesome because I was still pulling the Corvette. You know, at that point I realized it was time for either a rebuild or a new motor. At that point I didn't have a garage. She was living on the street in my parents' house, house with me, and I found a really good deal on a motor that was freshly rebuilt by Mazda Tricks. It had a full street port on it, 3mm apex seals, so the rotors were milled out. Factory or 2mm. You get 75% stronger with the 3s. Got the motor for a steal. I put that engine in on the street on jack stands. As I was doing the motor, I decided, all right, well, I can't do anything without going all in. So I decided to yank the horrible twin turbos out of it, do a single turbo swap, upgraded the entire fuel system, put a aftermarket fuel management in it, and got to where I am now, where it's making just over 400 at the wheels on 15 pounds of boost. It scoots.
And the car weighs?
Currently, in this state, it's just over 2,600 pounds.
Exterior-wise, it doesn't look like it's been touched much.
Well, the hood, I needed venting because with the single turbo, it runs super hot, which is the nature of the rotary engine. So I wanted a vented hood and the headlight covers because I lost the original ones. I think RX-7s, when you start putting body kits on them, it takes away from just the classic natural beauty of the car. You know, it's funny because a lot of people who don't know what it is, they ask me what kind of body work I've done to this thing. You know, it's all stock other than the hood and the headlight covers. The original seat, the leather was worn out and beat up, and originally I had two bride seats, one in the passenger side also. Had a lot of trouble fitting people into it and going for rides. Everybody asked me at all the car shows if they can go for a ride and experience it, and I decided to put the factory passenger seat back in. But I like the bride. It holds me really well, and I can corner it aggressively without sliding around, and kind of what the car is all about. It's all business. I have a full teen coilover system on it, and that's about it. Otherwise, everything else, factory sway bars are fantastic on it. I don't run into any issues. I have taken out the power steering of it, so the steering's super tight. I love a nice tight steering. AC's removed, factory emissions air pumps are all removed, so it's basically the crank system is running the necessities. Suspension wise, the coilovers are great. The body on them is actually adjustable, so I get the ride height by adjusting the body of the coilover, and I still have full adjustment of the spring rate without messing with spring weight. Yeah, it's super cool. Wheels are whatever the previous owner put on them. They're 18s, 9-inch in the front, 10-inch in the back. I actually prefer a smaller wheel, so I'll probably go back to a 17 with a fatter rubber sometime in the future to give it that 90s classic look. It's got the big front 4-piston brake calipers. The calipers are stock all around the car. I do have hawk pads all around in the drilled and slotted rotors. They bite really nice. I just put a speaker system in it. I was never going to do that. It had a really cool Bose acoustic wave system in it. I had an amp and a little 8-inch sub for my Del Sol, and turned out that I ended up selling the Del Sol, and my buddy's like, oh, you got to stick it in the FD. He helped me make the sub boxes. I'm all engine and mechanical, and you know, building stuff out of wood and body work is a little out of my classification. Kind of as I was saying in the beginning, I like something that's different and that stands out, and nowadays you go to the car shows and it's a lot of the same stuff. What happens if I take it to a show, I actually have to do my rounds pretty much as soon as I get in to check everything out, because as soon as I come back to the car, I'm there for the rest of the show because people are asking me millions of questions about it. It's always the only one there, and that's what I love about it. I actually just finished the whole project about 3 years ago. It sat for maybe 8 years while I saved up the money and the time to buy everything that I actually wanted for it. So the past 3 years, I've been driving it again, and it's been great. Haven't driven it as much this year as I wanted to because I have a 16-month-old at home now. He's a little firecracker that takes up my time, but who knows, maybe one day he'll inherit this off of Dad. They say everything's for sale, but it would take a lot to get me to get rid of this vehicle. You know, like I said, with the story of how I found it, and I've always wanted it, and the amount of time and work that I've put into it is just, this car's probably worth more to me than it ever would be anybody else. Something about RX-7s. The first car I ever bought on my own was a 2nd gen and didn't know anything about cars, and it didn't run, and I ended up fixing it out of a Haynes manual, and that's pretty much why I was a mechanic for 7 years, and it all happened because I got bit by the rotary engine.
So you became a mechanic because of the rotary engine?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, the coolest thing about them
out
is...
of necessity. You must have,
pretty much.
We'll get paid for this.
Yeah, pretty much. But the cool thing about rotary cars, it's different now than it was when I was buying them. I was getting FCs dirt cheap because nobody really knew what they were when I was buying them. But they'd have issues starting and running, and everybody like, I don't know anything about these rotary engines, so they'd kind of back away from it. And it would be something silly like an airflow meter or a fuel pump, and that's what's cool about them. Everything on the outside is just the same as a piston engine. It's just the internals there's only 3 moving parts inside of it.
Why do you think that it is so? I I guess, misunderstood? Is it just because the fact that it's so different than any other, the Wankel engine's so different than anything else?
I think that has a lot to do with it, and the RX-7 was really the most successful car that ever used it. In the 70s, everybody was experimenting with them. The RX-7 and Mazda were the only ones that actually kept the project alive and going, so I think people fear the unknown a little bit. They've had a reputation for being unreliable. A lot of that had to do with the way that they oiled the apex seals. They used an oil metering pump to pump oil directly into the rotor housings. I've eliminated all that and I run two-stroke mix now. So the two big things that give the rotary a bad name for reliability is because of the way they're oil metered, and people just don't want to do the two-stroke mix, and they run hot, the way that the rotary engine actually works. A reciprocating piston engine, the crankshaft turns 180 degrees to complete one piston cycle. Sure. The rotary engine, to get one rotor pocket completely around, is actually over 200 degrees. I don't know the exact number. I can't remember if it's 240 or 270 or 220, but it's somewhere in there. So the engine itself has more time to absorb the heat.
So what do you like about the rotary engine?
I love anything that burns gasoline, and I love, the Teslas. I love all of it. It's just different. And as I kind of hinted to it, it kind of suits me because I'm probably a little different too. They sound cool. And I think there's something to be said about somebody that has a running RX-7. They're a mechanic. They're a car guy. They don't mind getting their hands dirty. They have to know how the engine works. That's actually the biggest thing people say about it is they go, hey, you must be pretty good at doing this kind of stuff if you can keep this thing going. And it's truly not as unreliable as people think when you fix the tiny little things.
So what's the biggest challenge you had to face?
Money. When I pulled the motor out, I was on the street, so I had an engine stand with the car literally on the street next to the curb. So that was challenging. I put this engine together in my bedroom, all the manifolds, and went over it. I actually took it apart and made sure that everything was solid inside of it. So my bedroom always smelled like gasoline, and I had a cat, so I had to try and keep the cat out of the engine and the cat hair out of the engine.
So what's the furthest that you've taken it? You take it on shows a couple hours away?
I've taken it to Summit Raceway in, I think it's Norwalk, Ohio. Right after I first bought the car, they had a DSM shootout, and all my buddies built 4G63 cars. So like, come on, bring the FD down. And it's actually a really fun story because we're watching the racing, and I came out to get something, and the car was in the normal parking lot. They had a big 4G60 car show. We're walking in, and the track manager comes up to me and goes, hey, is that your RX-7? I go, yeah. He's like, bring it into the show. I'm like, well, it's rotary, it's not 4G. He's like, we'll make an exception for it. So he's like, I'm going to clear a spot. So we come in, and he parked us next to what at the time was the world's fastest Evo, which was Buescher Racing's Evo drag car. I was like, man, this is super cool. We're next to this super Evo right here. And we went out, finished watching some of the racing, and came back. And we couldn't even get to my car. There was such a big crowd around it just checking it out, and there was no one at the other Evo. So we were like, yeah, this is awesome. And it was me and my buddy. We squeezed our way through the crowd, and everyone's like, who are these jerks trying to squeeze through? And I shut the hood, and we ended up doing donuts for everybody and leaving. But it was super cool. It gets attention everywhere it goes. My other favorite story, my wife and I were driving in it, and we pull up to a traffic light, and this kid pulls up. He's on my left. His girlfriend's in the car. I just hear him, hey, I'll trade you my girlfriend for your car. I was laughing. My wife was laughing. The girlfriend didn't look too happy.
It's a 91 Mazda Miata.
You said there's a certain series. Which series they call
It's the NA, and the NAs have the pop-up headlights. I bought the car about 15 years ago, and what happened was I had a really good job with a company car, and the company got sold, and I got laid off, and they came and took the car away. So I didn't want to feel demoralized, and I needed an inexpensive car, and I looked through the Sunday paper and found an ad in the paper, and went and talked to a man who was in his mid to late 70s, I guess, and he had had knee surgery and was walking with a cane. And he said that he couldn't get in and out of it anymore, but he loved it and hated to sell it. So I bought it and drove home and with the top down, and I think it was about 45 degrees, and I loved every minute of it. And I drove the hell out of it for years, and didn't think too much of it. I really wasn't into the whole Miata scene. So then my life changed, and it sat in the driveway for a while. My wife at one point, I think it had like 2 flat tires and the paint was peeling off, and my wife made the huge mistake of saying, you need to either fix that thing up or sell it. That was my cue to fix it up. So I ended up going to Mako just because I didn't know where to go to get a paint job. They gave me a price of about like $900, and everyone kind of warned me. They said, you could probably get a better paint job someplace else. My neighbor owns a body shop, like a real professional body shop, and I went over and I talked to him, and I brought him the quote, and I said, look, I'm not asking you to match this or beat this or anything, but this is what they want to charge me. Am I wasting my time? What would you charge me? And he said, whoa, I can't even do the paint for that. I didn't realize how expensive car paint is. So he said if I could leave it with him for about 6 months, he could do it for about $1,500, which I discovered is a really good price. He turned it over to a guy in his shop named Gary, who worked on it pretty much exclusively, off and on for that 6 months. And I would go over there and visit with him on a Saturday or Sunday, and he'd be, stripping the whole thing down. He stripped it down to bare metal, took the doors off, the hood off, the trunk off to repaint it, and did an absolutely beautiful job. And that set me on fire. And from that point on, I wanted new wheels and anti-sway bars and tires, and then I redid the interior. I put in all new upholstery, redid the dash, the console, put in a new steering wheel. One thing I really like about that model is there's no passenger side airbag. And since I replaced the steering wheel on the other side with a sports steering wheel, there's no airbag in that. Airbags are great, but I really don't want a 28-year-old airbag blowing off in my face if I hit something. And I try to not hit something. I just went for a real European, Japanese cruiser, something that was kind of classic and timeless, and tried to keep it black and white, real simple for the color scheme. Nothing too flashy, but I wanted the kind of interior where if someone walked up and looked into it, they would want to drive it. I think I got close to that point, so I'm real happy with it.
Is there anything that somebody who's not a Miata person would be surprised by?
Yeah, it's not quick off the line, but once you get going, it's just the road blends with the car so beautifully, and it's smooth and it tracks well. You can hear the engine. It almost sounds cliche, but you almost become one with the car, especially on a road like the Blue Ridge Parkway.
When you redid the suspension, is it pretty much set up as stock
with lowered springs?
Okay, so it is a little lower.
Yeah, a little bit lower, and that wasn't my goal. It was just the way the springs came. That was, and when I dropped it down, because I really wasn't even into the whole lowering thing, I dropped it down. I'm like, well, actually, that looks pretty good. And then someone was like, whoa, you lowered your car, and I said, I guess I did. And the exhaust is just a Flowmaster DBX muffler that I put on. I had a muffler shop put it on.
Sure.
For me, and it sounds great. I do have headers on it, or header and singular, and I think that helped a lot, and an air intake on it, and that's about it. But a lot of it I really went for sound, look, experience over performance. The car performs well as it is. I mean, Miatas are great. They're not for everybody. I'm only about 5'9", so I fit in there real well. And that's another thing. I almost feel like I have an exclusive pass to drive a small car because I'm not a big guy.
When your goal is fun, that pretty much nailed it.
Fun, and how it looked, how someone who would walk up to it, how they would be struck by it. And I think just the simplicity of the black interior, the white exterior, I tried to go for a real clean look. I bumped out the rear tires a little bit with spacers. Thought it gave it a nicer stance. I know it changes the geometry of the suspension a little bit, but I'm not tracking it, and I'm not driving crazy.
What was the biggest challenge in getting it back to this condition?
It became almost a hobby of sorts to search for parts. Bookmarking every Miata parts catalog on the internet and searching for parts, and then searching for some parts that are very hard to get, like the gas cap. They're kind of hard to get. They're available, but you gotta really search for them. The rear view mirror is made in Germany. I can't tell you what brand it is. That's something that I really, really like. It's a real nice touch. It vibrates. It's tiny. It's hard to see out of, and I still love it. I love the way it looks. I redid the dash. That chrome dash panel around the gauges is kind of a rare piece, hard to get. All the other little chrome stuff, the door window winders, that's another thing I like it. No airbags and manual wind windows. Really, Miata is, I've read that they say it's the last of the analog cars.
Yeah.
And I really believe that because everything went digital. Obviously it has fuel injection, but I mean, after that, everything went digital. I really do think of it as one of the last cars that was made in that fashion. It's a little bit raw, but it's a blast. You know, I always joke that Miatas don't get a lot of respect, you know, when you're out on the road. And as a matter of fact, I did get bullied on situations by giant pickup trucks. But when I got the antique plates for it, you can get antique plates at 25 years, and it's 28 years old. All of that stopped. People backed off. People started looking to try to see what kind of car it was. Why did it have antique plates? Because it certainly doesn't look like it's 28 years old. I get that comment. It looks like a brand new car. Yeah, that's a nice compliment. I had the seats custom made by a guy down in Florida. They're vinyl. I didn't want to go with leather just because, like I said, the rest of the interior is pretty much plastic and vinyl. I didn't want to shell out that much money without being able to see them first, and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted. So I looked on the internet and like Google images of car seats, and I came across a Porsche from like the early 80s. I sent that picture to him and I said, "Can you do this?" And he said, "Sure, I can do it." They did a beautiful job, and the guy told me I was actually better off getting the vinyl. It'll last a lot longer, it'll hold up in the sun, that sort of thing. And it's not a Jaguar, it's not a Mercedes, it's not a Porsche. So I think that the vinyl actually kind of suits the car.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago, we went down to the Moss Motor Fest. Moss is a manufacturer of parts for Miatas and as well as British cars. And they have a headquarters outside of Petersburg, Virginia. And I drove down with some friends in the Miata Club that I belong to, the Blue Ridge Miata Club. I showed it. The weather wasn't great and the turnout wasn't tremendous. But then the skies got kind of dark and we decided to drive home, leave kind of early. And we took off and headed back home. And I really didn't think about it. And about 2 weeks later, a package came on the front door. It's actually 2 boxes, and it was from Moss Motors. I was racking my brain because, you know, I ordered so many parts for this car. I could not remember for the life of me what I had ordered from Moss. And I opened it up, and there were 2 trophies. I had won first in my class and best in show for the Miatas, which I was absolutely shocked. I had no idea. I really didn't. It made me very proud because I kind of felt vindicated at all the work that I did on it, and my wife kind of chuckled, and it's nice to be recognized by your peers. You can't make a Miata more than it is. You know, it's a little lightweight, underpowered sports car. I just chose to acknowledge it for what it is and just try to make it as nice as I could.
Doesn't look like it, but it's a 2015 Subaru BRZ, and I've swapped the distinguishing front bumper for its twin, the FRS. So It looks like a Scion FRS, but it's really a Subaru BRZ.
So why this car?
One of the reasons is I didn't know anything about cars when I got it, and I knew it was a Subaru, and it got good reviews. And my last car was a Subaru, and I liked it, so that's why I got it. It's a great platform for making it your own. That's the main thing I've enjoyed, just a bunch of little tweaks to make it unique. I was really after something really small and purpose-built, like kind of no wasted space sort of thing. Just me and my wife right now, no kids, so why not have a little fun car for a while? The biggest difference is the exterior. Obviously the emblems have been swapped for the original Katakana Toyota emblem. This car is a joint project between Subaru and Toyota. The headlights and the fog lights, pretty much all the exterior lighting actually has been swapped out. The fender garnishes were another way to distinguish the cars, and then there's a little spoiler on the back. Swap that out as well. I knew I wanted to go for the silver and black look. I started with the free stuff. There's a mod you can do with the clutch pedal to make it feel more linear. You take out an assist spring that people say makes the clutch feel better. So I took out my wrenches and screwdriver, and that was the first thing I did to the car. Pretty much immediately after that, I swapped the catback because the previous owner, what I found out later, is the loudest possible catback you can buy. I actually picked up this car in St. Louis. So I flew overnight, had to sleep in the airport because they canceled my flight. No sleep, driving the loudest possible version of this car home, 14-hour drive straight. First thing I did when I got back was just unbolted it and said, I'm getting a different catback. I literally have hearing loss because of that.
So what's on it now?
It's a custom exhaust aftermarket, pretty much from the header back. So it's a JDL unequal length catless header, JDL titanium overpipe and front pipe combo, dual resonated, and HKS Spec L catback. No more cats. It's been tuned with the flex fuel kit as well, so I'm running E85 and it pushes about 205, maybe 207 horsepower to the wheels. Suspension-wise, pretty simple. The Teen Flex A. It's supposed to be a good balance between road and track. I think it rides pretty well. There were some really cheap coilovers on it from the previous owner. These are worlds better. They're height adjustable, dampening adjustable. Fronts have camber from the top hats, and then I added lower control arms to the rear, so it's got full camber adjustment as well.
Is it your daily driver?
It is, yeah, it's my only car. It has to be comfortable around town, but then also kind of let me tear loose on a back road if I want.
Have you taken it on a significant trip?
The only really long trip I've taken it on was right after I bought it, so just driving home to North Carolina where we lived at the time. That was 14 hours. It did great.
Except for the earplugs?
Right.
Except for the hearing loss?
Right, should have brought earplugs, man. That was rough.
Is there anything that you ran into, like, oh, I didn't know I'd have to do that kind of thing?
Yeah, everything is hard because I'm not a car mechanic. This is the first car I've ever worked on. So before I would take it into the shop for everything, and now I'm trying to flip that around. I'm changing all my fluids, doing the wheels and tires myself, doing all the maintenance myself, doing all the mods myself that I can. So I've done everything from raising the engine to changing out the engine mounts, doing all the exhaust stuff, doing all the fluids, tail lights, pretty much everything except really complicated wiring I can do myself now. So it's going to be a fun project car. It's a lot of time and trouble and sweat and blood, and sometimes you cut yourself, wrenching something on and off. At the same time, I do really like working on it. It's a lot of fun. You can get into them pretty cheap. They're pretty good stock, and then it's also has a lot of headroom to grow. So obviously you can grow the power just with bolt-ons like I've done significantly. You can add 30% more horsepower to the car. But you can also improve suspension and handling and cooling and appearance. So I've really enjoyed having it and slowly building it up. Some modifications to the intake to simplify the airflow. Added a high flow reusable filter for the engine and the cabin. I like to replace things with reusable parts, so I'm trying to do that with the oil filter next. I'm going to do a magnetic reusable oil filter. I've done a drain plug on the bottom for the oil instead of the bolt. So I can just open and close it. I don't have to worry about torquing it down. I don't have to worry about crush washers or anything like that. It's kind of quality of life stuff. I'm going to add a brake vent kit, so instead of the fog lights, it'll be a little tube that runs in and spits out cold air into the center of the rotors just to help the brake pads stay alive for longer, because I'm trying to think long term. What can I do now that's going to save me money later?
That's all stock brakes.
Stock brakes. I'm going to put stainless steel lines on, and then with the vent kit, I think the brakes will be all right. It's a light car. You can get by with just kind of a pad for daily use, even if you're driving it hard. That's one nice thing about a small, light car. You can really get by without a lot of extra expense for performance mods like brakes and tires and stuff.
So what are the future plans?
If I build up the courage and we have some extra money laying around in case the engine blows, I will turbo it. But you got to be careful with these cars. The FA20 engine can't handle a lot of torque at the low RPM, so you have to be careful with the tune. Flex fuel helps because of cooling and knock resistance. Getting a good tune is really important, and then I'm going to get fuel pump injectors, a new clutch, and maybe even a new oiling intake system, because I've heard some people get air pockets at high revs. Previous owner put in a head unit with Apple CarPlay and a sub and all the wiring for that, and I kept that because the sub's pretty nice quality. That's pretty much the only mods from the previous owner I kept in. The knee pads over the speakers help you rest your leg against the side. Dash trim been replaced with leather. Steering wheel is a flat bottom steering wheel instead of the standard. A little bit of a chunkier grip. I managed to lower the seat a little bit by cutting out some supporting material on the bottom. That's made a bit of a difference with improving headroom, which has been nice. I added in this armrest for quality of life as well. Pedals have all been overlaid with grippier texture. My foot was sliding off a bit on the stock ones. The clutch pedal adjustment I talked about earlier, and then all-weather floor mats. This is a TRD performance part. It's supposed to hold the door to the rest of the car. So when you shut the car, it'll move just as much as it needs to and then create a solid connection between the door and the car. It stiffens it up a bit.
So is there a specific reason why you picked the NKs? Did you look at a bunch of different types of wheels, or is that just the one you like the style of the most?
Style I could take or leave. I wanted something light and strong and cheap. And the NKs are all three. There's only a few wheels that are like that.
So the all-important question, what's your wife think of it?
She likes it. She doesn't like when I'm working on the car and I'm under it because it freaks her out, but she likes riding around the car. She thinks it's cool. She was not happy when I flew out to get it and drove it 14 hours back, but yeah, she's been a good sport. She likes it. It's a fun car. It was made to be fun, which is great. There's only a few cars that are made to be fun. No one else really maximizes that, or fun factor is really high for sure.